Hello everyone, welcome to Migration and Modernization podcast. Today we are going to talk about migrating and modernizing your Microsoft workloads to AWS. My name is Siavash Irani, a solutions architect here at AWS. And today I'm joined with Yogi Barot.
My name is Yogi Barot. I'm a Microsoft Worldwide Tech Leader.
So Yogi, could you tell me about what type of Microsoft workloads do you see customers want to migrate to AWS?
Absolutely, yeah. When we talk about Microsoft workload, in generally, any kind of Windows ecosystem that you have, whether in your data center you are running SQL Server on Windows Server or .NET applications, file system, Active Directory, or you have a collaboration suite like Microsoft SharePoint or Microsoft Dynamics, any of those basically you can bring onto AWS. Essentially, any Microsoft program that you have it which is running on-premise, that can all go onto AWS. Whether you want to do just a quick lift and shift migration or you want to modernize, both approaches are valid.
Mm-hmm. And what type of challenges do you see customers are facing when migrating these workloads to the cloud?
Let me tell you about the challenges the customer face when migrating Microsoft workload. So the number one is licensing. And the reason why it's number one, licensing is like kind of a headache. Microsoft licensing can be tricky, and especially to whether determine if you can port those licenses to AWS or not. And once you determine whether you can port it, then like whether you should bring that license or not, or whether you should use AWS license included instance or not, right? So that can be challenging for customers to determine. Another thing I can say that a big problem for the customer is the legacy application, right? So those old business critical application that everyone relies on, they are not fit to run into newer operating system, right?
And most of the time, the developers, they have probably left the company, so they cannot even
so
rebuild
those
it.
old legacy applications are not cloud ready. So in that case, that needs an legacy Windows operating system component, and that can be challenging, especially when you want to do data center exit. And if you have those legacy workload that business does not want to get rid of it because they are very old but critical for business program. And in that case, that can be a challenge. And lastly, what I can see here is if you have a high performing, low latency, very large database, like say SQL Server database with a application dependency, and you have like complex network setup that needs to open the VPN and direct connect and figuring out the right latency requirement. Some application and database needs like IO intensive workload. Some of them are like high memory optimized workload, and some of them are like high CPU requirement. So balancing out between memory, CPU, IOPS, the storage performance, and figuring out the right balance, sometimes it can be challenging if you don't plan properly. It needs to be planned and tested.
Actually, on top of those, what I have seen is customers who are running Active Directory, there's always questions I'm getting asked of those infrastructure services, like how my DNS is going to be set up when I'm extending to the cloud. And on top of that, I believe another thing I've seen is that learning curve, right? Like when basically the teams are like, moving to the cloud, it's going to be hard for me to operate, and I don't know where to start and all of that. So those are a couple of different challenges that I have seen with migrating to the cloud.
I see. So what kind of consideration you do for migrating Microsoft workload to cloud?
So I think when you look at the cloud migration as a journey, right, you can look at three phases that we define in a cloud migration, right? The first phase is called assess phase, right? This is where you actually figure out even what is it that you're running in your environment. And that's, if I ask you, hey, what are you running in your environment? And you export an Excel spreadsheet, give it to me. And that moment you export it is already out of date because especially when you're operating at scale, things are dynamic. Things change very quickly. So, you need to have some sort of tool where it gives you that dynamic inventory of your workloads and dependency mapping of, what is it that, how applications are dependent to each other. So that's the first phase, right? That's the first assess phase where you need to figure out what you got. And then the second phase is the mobilize phase. This is where you're building your account strategies, you're building your control tower, you're defining how your migration is going to happen, maybe training your teams and the different tools that they may be migrating. And of course, the last phase would be doing the actual migration. Now, one consideration I want customers to make is, and the challenge I see is customers get stuck within those first two phases where they do an assessment, they find some stuff, and then they are like, okay, now I want to build an account strategy for it. How am I going to do it, right? And they keep going through this loop of assessing and revisiting their environment, and they never migrate, or their migration takes long because they just basically spend too much time on that. So I'm not saying that the assessment phase and planning phase is not important. It's definitely super important. But one thing to note is a lot of these decisions that you make while migrating to the cloud are two-way door decisions. Let's say if I pick an instance type that is wrong, or it's overcommitted or under committed, I could go ahead and change that with a simple API call. Or if I didn't assign a department proper AWS account for them, I could go ahead and change that later on. So because many of these decisions are two-way door decisions, my suggestion to those customers are, if you see you can make a decision faster, go with it, and you can always come back and change those decisions later.
And absolutely, that's the beauty of cloud, right? You can anytime shut down your instance, anytime upgrade it, change it, right? So one thing I would like to stress about is assessment, right? So when we do this assessment, we have a tool called Optimizing and Licensing Assessment, OLA. We call it as an OLA. With OLA, typically customer can save 35 to 65% of cost, right? And it's designed to help customers save costs, especially for Microsoft workload, because Microsoft workload requires licensing, right? So the OLA helps in two ways, right? So let me say the first way is basically it's going to look at your overall environment, look at the footprint of what you have deployed, and it's going to suggest a right sizing recommendation. Most of the time, customer environment is over provision. Either you have more memory, more CPU, more storage than you need. But this tool is going to go look at the actual real-time performance data. It's going to look at some trends, and it's going to do an analysis and generate the right recommendation based on what you need rather than what you have, right? So that is the key to save cost. And second thing OLA does is about licensing assessment. Most of the times, customer license are either over-provisioned or they are not utilizing license efficiently. So doing this OLA will help first whether to determine you can bring that license to cloud. Second, determining in which cases you used AWS provided licensing, when it makes sense to use AWS provided licensing. And the third thing is what kind of SQL Server version and edition to bring, how to save cost for your SQL licensing. And the lastly is consolidation, because consolidation can help save licensing cost as well. Right, so I have first-hand seen this recommendation when the customers start using this OLA at the beginning of their cloud migration journey. They have like a proper infrastructure and licensing strategy, and they save a lot of cost. Actually, it's not about what you do or how fast you do the migration. It's when you migrate, you need to determine about how smartly and securely you're saving cost from the beginning of the migration. Let me tell you my story. When I was a DBA back then, and when my business counter people asked me about what kind of SQL Server edition you would require, and I would say, let's go for Enterprise Edition. And now thinking back again, do I need that Enterprise Edition? Not really all the time. I just had it because just in case I need to use it for the future, right? But going to the cloud, that is very critical decision, because there is a significant cost, more than 50% cost difference between standard edition and enterprise edition, right? Depends on the version and the edition. So you need to carefully consider. You can always start with standard edition if you're not using the enterprise edition feature, and you can always change it later on, as you say, like you can always upgrade and move it to a higher version, right?
Yep. And actually, I remember when I was a system admin, we used to run things on VMware, and we had this big physical servers where the memory and the CPU was sitting there on the server. If we didn't assign it to VMs, then it would be just we already paid for it, so we might as well assign it to those servers. So at the time, like all of our VMs, virtual machines, I remember they were all over provisioned, right? But that's because of the nature of how you operate on premises.
So now, since we covered the assessment and licensing and all this consideration, can you talk more about migrating those workloads? Like, how do you migrate Microsoft-specific workload to AWS?
Yeah, so there are different tools that AWS offers that helps with the migration, right? First, let's pick those virtual machines that you may be running. And when you look at virtual machines that you're running, you either, there are, of course, different virtualization platforms, the famous ones being, VMware, Hyper-V, maybe you're running things on open source or other virtualization platforms. Now, for migrating virtual machines as they are, there are different tools that exist. One is VM import and export tool, which is a bit of older tool. And the way it works is basically you are specifying the disks, the virtual disks that are attached to your VMs, and VM import tool, it's going to upload them to S3. It's a whole process in the backend. I'm not going to go into details of it, how it works, but end of the day, basically what you make an API call, those disks are uploaded to AWS, they're converted to EBS volume, and we add all the required components like drivers or things that is required for those operating systems to basically run successfully on the AWS hypervisor, which is the Nitro, then we create an AMI for you where you can now launch your instances from that AMI. Now, that's one way. And the other tool is Application Migration Service, or short for MGN. What Application Migration Service does, it's meant for those customers which cannot tolerate any downtime. And the way it works, when you set up Application Migration Service for your workload, and you can set it up for your on-premises servers, or if your servers are located, let's say, in other cloud providers, when you set that up, it starts doing a continuous replication of all the disks that is attached to your operating system, right? So even you think about it, if that disk volume is over like an iSCSI, it still starts capturing all those chunks and disk blocks and replicates it to AWS. And then MGN allows you to create a test workload based off of everything that was migrated. So after initial migration may take, initial replication may take a while, and then after that's done, continuous replication. Remember, during this time, your source servers are still running. We didn't shut them down. And now you want to test it, you go into MGN and you launch new instances or set of instances from that, shape that workload in a normally isolated environment. You test the workload. Once it's successful, then when it's the time to cut over, you basically have MGN to launch your final instances, which you can now, launch and, basically then you're going to shut down the original source servers.
So do you have any customer example that they are using MGN, like any kind of a benchmark that you use for how many number of servers or things like that?
Yeah, so actually I had a bunch of customers which use MGN. One of them recently I was involved with, where they had this multi-tier application where it was consist of IS web servers, mid-tier servers, and then backend SQL servers, which they just wanted to really get a grasp of how is it going to operate in the AWS, and they exactly did that. They used MGN, replicated the whole environment, have their team test it. Once it's all successful, then they went ahead and basically deprecated everything that they had on premises. And the beauty of it is, because it's the continuous replication, really they had minimal downtime while doing that, right? So that's basically with the MGN. Now, also, another thing that comes up a lot is file servers, right? So customers run different file servers, of course, right? It could be Windows file servers. It could be, and sometimes, often you see, they have storage area networks like SANs. And for those, again, if you're running on VMs, totally fine to use something like MGN to do a block replication of all your file system and bring it to the cloud. But also, if you want to go with managed services, if you're a Windows shop, Amazon FSx for Windows File Server, where basically it's a managed service for building a cluster of Windows file servers. It's fully compatible with Windows and SMB different versions. And what you do is you can use either AWS Data Sync to transfer your data over, or using something like native tools like RoboCopy to copy your files. Now, for those customers who are running NetApp SAN storages, what they can do, they can use Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP, which also gives them a native NetApp functionality on AWS. And for migrating to those, of course, they can also always use the native NetApp tools to migrate those files. And now I know I talked about storage. Yogi, I know you're expert in SQL. So how about SQL Server?
Sure. For SQL Server, we have different of migration options. Actually, first, let me talk about the deployment option, and then we'll cover the migration, right? So for SQL Server, depends on what your use case. You can deploy onto Amazon EC2, or you can deploy onto our managed service, Amazon RDS for SQL Server. So with Amazon EC2 for SQL Server, it's like a lift and shift migration. You can bring your license as well. It's pretty simple. It's a flexible option, and it's just like the same feeling as running it on premises, right? So if you have a specific requirement to have like full control of the database environment and doing the same exactly what you're doing on premises, then you can run it on EC2 instance. That's a choice for you. The second option we have is running on Amazon RDS for SQL Server, right? Mm-hmm. So with RDS for SQL Server, it's a fully managed service. So it gives you an advantage of AWS managing all the day-to-day administration tasks like backup, patching, high availability. Everything is managed by AWS, and you can focus more on data and application strategy, and at the same time give the administration overhead to AWS, right? So that's about two different deployment options. Now, say you like a managed service and you also want a flexibility.
Yep.
So for example, I have a customer asking about, hey, I want to run an custom monitoring agent like Datadog or any other monitoring tools. I want to install that onto my database server. Or I have a custom driver requirement, and I like the managed service, but I need that SA, right, for my application. So those kind of customization, if you want to do with your RDS, we have a service called Amazon RDS Custom for SQL Server that allows you to give a managed experience. At the same time, you can do this customization based on your need, right? So it's a good of both world. So depends on what you want. Like the best option you determine based on your workload, based on your requirement. And now when you want to modernize, right? So this was like SQL to SQL migration, right? Mm-hmm. But see, you can also have a SQL Server migrated to Postgres, like Amazon Aurora for PostgreSQL or RDS PostgreSQL. So in that case, you are moving away from SQL Server engine and you are going to open source engine, right? So that's a difference over there. Now let's talk about the migration tools for SQL Server, right? So for SQL Server specifically, actually, I remember when you're talking about application migration service, I had a lot of customers use that for VM migration, right? Yep. So they just want to migrate as it is, everything on premises, including operating system, SQL Server installed, any applications, any database, everything installed as it is. They want to do migration to AWS. They can use application migration service, MGN. Or they can use other native tools like SQL Server backup and restore, right? So it does supports the full backup, differential transaction log backup. If you want to run that on RDS, supports the full backup and transaction backup, and restore that as well. And if you want to do other tools like log shipping, you might say, Yogi, that's very old. I know it's old, but it still works, right? So old is gold. It still works. Yep. So that log shipping, if you are using always on availability cluster, you can also extend your always on AG clusters to AWS as well, and then do migration that way. or you can use our managed service AWS database migration as service. With DMS, you can do homogeneous migration like SQL Server to SQL, or you can do heterogeneous as well from SQL Server to PostgreSQL as well. Those are variety of options for migration. Depends on your business need and use case. You can select either of them. Actually, that remind me of a customer. Earlier, you talked about one of the customer. So this customer is like a SAP Concur. They had their 80,000 plus databases on premises, and they wanted to move to cloud to get an advantage of cloud scalability, consolidate everything, and also save some cost. So they started migrating to Amazon EC2, SQL Server running on Amazon EC2. With that, they were able to finish that migration project in 8 months, and they used application migration service. They used the AWS database migration service, both of them. And at the end of the project, they were able to be 70% more efficient, right? Cost savings and efficient by moving everything to AWS.
Actually, you brought a good point about using native tools to do the migration. This is something I often get where customers, when they're trying to migrate Active Directory, right? And they ask me, hey, should I use a specific tool to do the migration? And honestly, often those native tools are totally fine to migrate. Like, for example, for the Active Directory, I asked them, hey, you have your existing domain. What you can do, just bring up a new virtual machine on EC2 and just add it as additional domain controllers for your environments. Now, of course, some customers, they may want to have specific use cases to use AWS Microsoft Managed AD, which is totally fine, and then establish a trust with their on-premises AD. One best practice that we always tell customers regarding migration of Active Directory is keeping the number of domains that you're managing to a minimum. Right now, sometimes it's possible. Sometimes maybe you had an acquisition or you have specific use cases that may not be possible. But and regarding to that, I want to highlight one of the features that AWS Managed AD launched this year, called a hybrid managed AD, where basically what we do is we keep your existing Active Directory domain controllers. You have that, it's the same domain. Now what we do, we add additional managed domain controllers to that same domain, which is managed by AWS now, and that functionality basically gives you the benefit of both worlds, right? Both being able to manage, use a managed service, and at the same time keeping the number of domains to a minimum. So I know we talked about Active Directory. How about .NET workloads, Yogi?
.NET applications has also follow similar patterns, right? So you can rehost to Amazon EC2, like as it is lift and shift migration. It requires like minimum, actually no code change, and you can run it on EC2. When you want to refactor those .NET application, you can run onto AWS managed service, like AWS Elastic Beanstalk service. With that, it's like a managed experience, and it's a little bit of like minimal code change with that as well. And when you want to refactor, you can refactor or you can re-architect as well, right? So for .NET application, you can basically convert into Docker container and run that container onto Windows container or Linux container. Either of them run onto Amazon ECS or Amazon EKS, right? So those are also options for .NET application. And you can convert to completely serverless, like run on AWS Lambda. That's also an option, right? So depends on your use case, whether you want to rehost to EC2, replatform to Elastic Beanstalk, or you want to refactor and re-architect to run on containers, right? So multiple options, and depends on your choice. And the last one is the container one and serverless one. That's the most optimal, but it's the one require more time in conversation and migration. So now that we covered about migrating Windows Server, SQL Server, Active Directory, .NET application, file servers, can you tell about like once customer migrate those workload to AWS, how operationally it's different when you run the same workload on premises and now you have to run the same workload onto AWS, especially Microsoft workload?
Yeah, definitely. And when you look at operations for Microsoft workloads, I think one of the tasks that is very common and everybody must do, any Windows admin pretty much, is making sure your Windows workloads are up to date with all the patches that Microsoft normally releases on second Tuesday of every month, right? And again, using native tools to do those tasks, like for patching, is totally fine, right? But when you're operating at in the cloud, and normally you may have some of your workload in one AWS account, or multiple AWS account, or multiple regions, or some part of that same workload may be sitting in your on-premises environment still, or other cloud providers, and you need like a tool where you can, and let's say all these workloads, they're part of a test and dev and prod environment. Normally, when you do patching, you do want to do your test environment first, and then maybe dev environment, and then going with that prod. Now, when you want to target all of these different environments at the same time, that could become challenging. You need a better tool to do this. And one of the tools that can help with this is AWS Systems Manager Patch Manager, which allows you to target all these instances no matter where they're located. And you can set basically different patch baseline that is compliant with your patch policies, and apply patches at scale, right? And then get a nice report of what patches got installed, what failed, and basically take action on that. So that's one thing. And then another task that often comes up is monitoring, right? You have to keep monitoring for your servers for both performance metrics and also for logs, to make sure if something is about to happen or if something went wrong, you can fix those issues. And of course, again, using native tools that you have, or any third party, that's totally fine. But also Amazon CloudWatch and CloudWatch Agent specifically allows you to capture metrics, pretty much any metric that is shown in Windows performance counters. You can capture those, as well as logs, different logs from Windows event logs to IS logs, or just a pure text file. You can capture all of that, send it to a CloudWatch dashboard, and have a single pane of glass where you look at all these logs and metrics, and not only you can get notified if something goes bad, but also you can take action to fix those issues. How about modernization, Yogi? Do you want to talk about that? What does even modernization mean?
Modernization, actually, in today's context, modernization is a process of transforming your application and infrastructure into high-value open source or cloud-native services. Right? Mm-hmm. That's a modernization definition. When I say why customers should modernize, is modernization can give them get the better business benefit, right? So, for example, they can go for innovation. It opens up reduce the technical depth, and at the same time, it can reduce the lower cost of ownership, especially with modernizing Windows workload. It saves you from commercial licensing cost, right? That's why customers should modernize, because it unravels the business benefits, right, which they did not had it earlier. Now, when I think about Microsoft workload modernization, right? Customer asks me these questions like, what do you see in Microsoft workload modernization, right? Typically taking your Windows-based application and transferring into a cloud-native environment, right? So that it can run on cloud-native infrastructure. So that is what is modernization of Windows workload. So I can give you some practical example.
Sure.
So basically taking your .NET framework application and converting into .NET Core. So now it can run from Windows to Linux environment. Or taking your monolithic application and breaking down and converting into microservice application. Or you can also have your application, which is written right now in any form, like maybe containerize that using Docker or Kubernetes, and then run it onto ECS or EKS. That's also modernization of application. Or you have an applications which is like web-based application, take that and run onto managed service like AWS App Runner, right? Mm-hmm. So these are the examples of application modernization, right? Now let's talk about database modernization, right? So with database modernization, you can take the SQL Server database and now convert into different engine like PostgreSQL, open source, run it on Amazon Aurora for PostgreSQL. You might say, this is like very challenging because you are completely changing your database platform, and it's not an easy one. Like you have like years of stored procedures and complex code developed and all these things. But actually, when you move to Aurora PostgreSQL, you get an advantage is like cost savings. So you get really high performance when you move to Amazon Aurora for PostgreSQL. So those are the couple of, I just covered the major things. You can again modernize like file system and Active Directory, managed things like that. But this is like a high level. That's what customer consider modernization.
Yeah. How about challenges? Like when you talk to customers about modernization, and what are the different challenges that they face for modernization?
So when we think about modernization, business wants to do modernization. IT, technical people, they want to do modernization. But there are some real challenges they face, right? So one of them is database modernization challenge. I mentioned about moving from SQL Server to PostgreSQL. It's not an easy change, right? So because you are completely changing the engine. So customers have been trying to run SQL Server for many years. So I've been managed SQL Server from last 25 plus years, right? So if the customers has been running SQL Server for many years, they have this complex stored procedures, right? Complex business logic. They have this link server, and then they have business logic that no one even remembers what it is now, right? So to converting that, it's not only a technical challenge, but it's also a business conversation as well, right? Because everything has to be converted now. So that is one of the challenge, is taking the database as it is with like years of legacy development, now converting that into another database platform. And what are the tools? I don't have an expertise. I don't have a tools. I don't have a timeline. I still want to keep my existing application as it is running. And now you are telling me to modernize, like how am I going to balance that? So I think that is one of the challenge customer face. And second one I see is with application modernization. Let's say Microsoft .NET application, right? So if you're running a typical Microsoft .NET framework application, and that application you are trying to convert, it's not designed to run for cloud. So it's not going to run as it is because it's looking for that legacy DLL or legacy x86 executable, or it has some Internet Explorer integration, right? Or some older Windows component. So even though customer wanted to convert and modernize that legacy .NET application, the challenge is here. They don't have a better tools. They don't have that timeline is so long. And the same thing, the skill set is as well, right? So those applications has been written like 20 years ago by someone who is not there anymore in the company, right? So those can be real challenge. And the other one I think is a people challenge as well. So Windows administration or doing and working on a Windows system needs different skill set. Now you are asking those Windows admin people or Windows users that now you have to learn container, serverless, or Lambda, things like that. So finding the right balance between the skill set, like getting the Windows skills at the same time getting the cloud skills, it's a challenge as well.
So actually, one of the challenges I've seen is just business leaders in general. They don't want to change something that is already working. So when you talk to them about modernization, they're like, why would I even change this if it's already working, right? So that's another challenge I've seen. Now, how do you overcome these challenges?
Great question, right? So glad I'm here working with at AWS, where we have a great tools to help customer modernizing and overcoming those challenges. So let's talk about the first one with database modernization challenge, right? I think earlier in 2016, AWS released a service called AWS schema conversion tool, right? So with we call it as an SCT. With schema conversion tool, it's a standalone tool that you can download and you can point it against your database schema, and it's going to generate and report. And at the same time, whatever it could convert to PostgreSQL, it would do a conversation. Typically, we see like 70 to 80% success with this tool, but then remaining work you have to do manually convert, especially if you have a complex store procedures using a lot of SQL native features, right? So that was the tool that customers started using it. And then when you have to migrate the data, we have an AWS database migration service that can do heterogeneous migration as well. So migrating from SQL Server to PostgreSQL in this case, customer use that AWS DMS tool. So until now, recently, I think last year we announced AWS DMS capability. It's a generative AI-based capability to do modernization. So basically use the schema, whatever was schema conversion tool was doing. Instead of doing that, like this functionality is now part of the AWS DMS. It's a generative AI tool that can take your SQL Server code and convert into PostgreSQL. So earlier, the code snippet, which were not converted and left for manual effort, now the AI-based tool uses that LLM and runs against Amazon Bedrock, and then it does the conversation, basically. So this tool, AWS DMS is SCT is still there. It's like it's still like you can still download it. It's like an agent-based, it's executable-based tool. But the DMS is like a web-based tool, console experience, and you can point your database source and target, and it's going to do the conversation for you. So what I'm trying to say here is AWS has the tools, and it's using generative AI to help you accelerate your modernization for database, right? So to solve the DB modernization challenge, this is the one thing that we are doing. And second thing about application modernization. Now, when I think about Microsoft application, it's like obviously .NET modernization, right? So a lot of customers still has application written in .NET framework. Actually, when I think about my career journey, when I started, at that time it was .NET 1.1, right? And over the last 2 decades, it's been evolved. And last year, November, Microsoft released .NET 8 LTS version. So from .NET 1.1, which runs on .NET Framework, Windows operating system, and going to .NET 8 LTS, which is like a cross-platform .NET. It can run on Windows and Linux, like any platform. So this overall journey, customer was still fine developing using .NET Framework or even .NET Core. But the issue is that, as I mentioned, .NET Framework only runs on Windows. So when you modernize to .NET Core, you can take few advantages, basically. Number one is like now you can run on Linux, get up to 40% cost savings of licensing, right? Second thing is you can get by default like 1.5 to 2 times better performance. Without making your application code changes, you can get better performance. Then third thing is you can get 50% better scalability, right? So all these benefits are good for customer. So customers started to modernize that on their own, right? So they started looking at the code, making the changes, analyzing the dependencies, looking at the nugget packages, looking at the APIs, and transforming the code, validating the code, porting again, and doing this in a cycle. But this whole process is error-prone and repeatable. Do you have only one application in your enterprise?
Oh, no.
Yeah. So enterprise customers has hundreds of applications, right? So in that case, doing this process again and again was very time-consuming, and some customer never even ended that, or they just left in the middle. So to help our customers, last year reInvent, we came up with a service, Amazon Q Developer Transformation for .NET, and that allowed to port your .NET framework to .NET 8 Core. And it can do at scale so that your larger application footprint can be converted. And earlier this year, in May of 2025, we released the AWS Transform for .NET service. So with this service, the advantage that we have, if we make that part completely separate and we make it for developers to give better experience to use themselves, right? So we have two experiences. One of them is a web experience. With web experience, like where do you store your repository?
GitHub, GitLab.
GitHub, GitLab, yeah, exactly. So you point the web experience to your code repository like GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, Azure DevOps, and it's doing the scan of that all repositories, looking for the packages, looking for all the interdependency between the projects and solutions, and it's going to port all of those applications if it's applicable to .NET 8 core. Right?
So question: this AWS Transfer for .NET, is it? What's the cost for this?
It's completely free actually. So what it does, it does this assessment, does the transformation, it does the assessment, and it also does the validation, and it generates the whole report. It also generates the Linux readiness report as well to see whether now you can take this whole application and directly port to Linux and run on ECS or EKS, right? So with AWS Transform, that's a web experience. And we also have IDE experience. So if you are an individual developer, and if you just have one solution, and if you want to port that, you can just use an IDE environment and then port that application to .NET Core. Cool. So basically, as I mentioned, it's completely free of cost. How
about any limitations?
With this tool, actually, you can transform 1 million line of code per month.
At no cost.
Per month at no cost.
Got it.
Yeah. Cool. And I also get a lot of questions about what kind of version is supported. So like the source is .NET 3.1 and then destination is .NET 8. And you can go, why not .NET 9? Because .NET 9 is not an LTS yet. So we only look at the LTS, like long-term supportability .NET version.
Cool. I know you covered the tooling for modernization. I want to also talk about a little bit like the people aspect of it, right? Like how do you help people when they are going through the modernization and how AWS can help with that? So I want to talk about a little bit just about the EBA or experience-based acceleration for modernization. Basically, it's a program where we work with customers on who want to modernize, right? And we ask the customers to go and pick that one application that you want to modernize, right? Of course, there's so many of them, but just pick one of them. And also, we ask them to gather different teams who are involved in doing that practice, right? Basically, you may bring in people who are from the actual developers who wrote the code, from security teams, from leadership, decision makers, maybe even a partner if it's involved, and AWS experts all in one room. And normally it's a couple of days program where we help customers modernize that one application, and then all the learning they take that and they apply it to other applications which they are planning to modernize. And we've been seeing very success with this program.
Actually, I have seen a successful customer modernization using EBA, right? So I can also share another customer story. Sure. Actually. This is one of the customer that I'm working with them, like Thomson Reuters. They had their legacy application, and it was working perfectly fine, right? So it's not that there was any issue with the application, but it was written in .NET framework. And when they decide to modernize and to port that to .NET Core, it was taking them time. Like they had like months of project plan. It was difficult to scale, and it was basically hindering the innovations because they wanted to move out fast, and because they were doing all this manual work, they were trying to find some automation. So they also looked at other cloud provider and also tried their tools, but that were not helping modernize at scale, right? So when they started working with AWS Transform for .NET, they see the real use case of the tool, right? So they see with AWS Transform for .NET, within first month, they modernize 1.5 million lines of code, right? Giving that 4 times more velocity. They were able to save 50% of the cost from the technical depth because of moving from .NET Framework to .NET Core. And they were able to reduce the deployment, like overall conversation time. The application modernization time from months to weeks now in a sprints, right? So that way, the customer actually still modernizing. They are not done. They are still modernizing like 1.5 million lines of code every month, right? So what I would like to say, like if you have a large, doesn't matter where you stand right now in modernization journey, whether you have a large application code base or if you have smaller applications, but at one day you need to work on it to get modernized, right?
Yep.
So what I'm saying that just try it once so that you know where do you stand right now. Like at least do an assessment and get the assessment report done. It's free of cost, right? So it's nothing hurts to do an assessment.
Yep. Cool. Thank you.
I would like to ask, I think we covered the migration, modernization operations. Now, lastly, can you cover the cost optimization? Like how do customers save cost for Microsoft workload?
Definitely. And, cost is a topic which we couldn't skip, right? So, one thing is, over the past couple of years, which we've been running Microsoft workloads on AWS, and we have helped customers optimizing their costs through different methods. Really, if I wanted to list all of them, it would take a whole day maybe. But what we did, we actually captured all those different techniques, services, and things that customers can do to reduce their costs and optimize their costs while keeping their performance high into a library called Microsoft on AWS Cost Optimization, short for MACO, which is available on AWS prescriptive guidance and different type of workload. It has different recommendation, but there are a couple of them which I want to highlight here. The first one is OLA, which we talked about, right? Which we talked about it in the concept of migration, where during the assessment phase, you want to know what you have and you use the OLA. But actually, OLA can be also done for your existing workload. So if you already migrated and you have workloads running at AWS, you can still run OLA against those workloads and optimize for both performance and cost. And then the other service which I want to highlight here is AWS Compute Optimizer. So a lot of times when you decide on what instance type your instance needs to use, you come up with something, you estimate something, right? But you wouldn't know exactly what is the exact optimized instance type unless your workload is under load, right? But even after, although you look at the monitoring and performance metrics, still you need a better tool to do that, right? So AWS Compute Optimizer, when you enable it, it looks at your performance metrics, it looks at your logs if you enable those, and using AI, it learns your application behavior and those instances behavior over time. And after a while, it gives you suggestions of what instance types you can switch your instances to save on, to keep the performance, but also reducing cost. So the next one that I want to talk about is AWS License Manager license switching feature. So License Manager itself, it allows you to track and enforce licenses for Microsoft-based licenses or some of the other third parties. But one of the features is its license switching feature, which allows you to switch licenses between bring your own license or license included. So think about a scenario where maybe you have some licenses being freed up somewhere else in your environment and you want to bring them to AWS. You don't have to rebuild those workloads. You can use AWS License Manager to switch from license included to BYOL or vice versa for your workloads. So Yogi, we are almost at time. What are the takeaways from this session?
All right, let's wrap up this by some takeaway summary messages. First of all, I would like you to don't skimp on the planning, right? Doing that optimizing and licensing assessment is a key. It will help you right size your environment. It's going to basically like give you a health check on your whole infrastructure and save cost. Mm-hmm. Second thing is plan your strategy wisely. Not one size fit all approach, right? So certain things you can do left and shift migration, and then certain application and database, you can modernize it, right? So plan your waves, group your application and database, and plan both your waves accordingly based on your business need. So that's second thing. And third thing is we talked about so many great tools and options that you have, right? So go based on what you need, right? You can also use native tools, or you can also use different AWS tools. So determine your requirement, determine your skill set, and based on your business need and skill set, go tool that your team is most experienced with. I would say go with that. And fourth thing is about don't rush for the modernization, right? Modernization is not an overnight journey. It's not going to take you from here to next destination in a day, right? It takes little bit time, right? It's a strategical process that you have to go through, but at least start thinking about it. Start thinking now. If you have not started thinking about it, you should start thinking about modernization right now. What kind of benefits it's going to avail you, and what good things is waiting for you in cloud, right? If you have not tried the AWS Transform for .NET, and if you have a legacy workload, I would say try that out. There's nothing wrong in trying. It's a free tool for you. You can run an assessment and look at the report and see how your environment looks like. At least it gives you an idea where do you stand right now. And lastly, we have programs and tools to help you, right? So as Siavash, as you mentioned about the EBAs, we can always start with an POC application and do an EBA. And then the whole AWS experts team is with there to help you get started with your modernization and migration journey. We also have programs like MAP, Migration Acceleration Program. We have a Modernization Acceleration Program. We have a DB Freedom. We have different programs that can help you give some funding as well, that can help you ease away some cost for migration. We have plenty of partners who are also has a migration and modernization competency. They can also help you get started with this journey, right? So what I would say, doesn't matter where do you stand in your journey, whether you already started your migration and modernization journey or you are just taking a step into it, it's never too late.
Yep.
I'd say let's just start now, and then you will see what benefits at then you will gain when you move to the cloud.
Yogi, I know we're at time. You just touched on MAP. Can you talk about MAP a little bit?
So MAP is an AWS program that can help you accelerate your migration. Basically, it gives you funding and resources and methodology that you can use to migrate to AWS.
Thank you so much, Yogi. I really appreciate all the information. And I want to thank everyone for joining this podcast. We hope you found this informative. And thanks for watching.
Thank you.